Folks, thanks for tuning in again today to get behind the scene on the main news items that really matter, and both in Canada and the U.S. Appreciate the comments coming in and the feedback. We're trying to improve as we move along. A ton of stuff to look at today. Obviously, most people have been fixed on their devices and their screens looking at what's happening relative to Iran. So I will give you some behind the scenes on that. We're seeing, and as we know, in a conflict like this, when there are first announcements and when it first starts up, excuse me, and there are early signs of supposed breakthroughs and heavy hitting going on, there's generally support, and especially as people learn more and more about what the Iran, just how evil that theocracy is. And around Canada, we see at the embassies and consulates in various places. We see in Vancouver, we see it in Winnipeg, in Calgary, large numbers of people of Iranian descent out on the streets celebrating and cheering and trying to send a message globally of what a good thing this is to see that incredibly evil dictatorship starting to collapse. But I just want to mention that every day that the conflict goes on, and there will be more and more reports, there'll be reports of U.S. Individuals, soldiers possibly being killed. They're not, no boots on the ground there, but you're going to see increase of that. We saw the accidental shooting down of U.S. warplanes by Kuwait, and Kuwait, of course, has apologized. You see some deaths now in Israel. So as these mount and as mainstream media will continue to focus on the negative, you will see public support for this in the U.S. and even around the world starting to decline somewhat. That is why the U.S. is continuing to push on for these early wins, and they're getting many of them, including destroying the Navy capabilities of Iran. That's very important. We'll talk about that in just a second. And we see already, in Canada, it's been interesting right from the start. The CBC, which is Canada's subsidized liberal propaganda mouthpiece, I guess you could say it, right from the start, you can see the CBC slant heavily towards sympathy towards the dictators in Iran. You saw the picture, as I'm sure many did, of two women apparently in tears. They're wearing their hijabs, and they're holding up a picture of one of the cruelest, most vicious leaders of modern times, the Khomeini, the Ayatollah, who was killed in that early strike, and they're weeping. And so right from the start, you see this, CBC, this is in Canada, for those of you who are outside of Canada, taking really a deplorable approach to celebrating and trying to get sympathy for a regime that is just so lethal and the major exporter of terrorism around the world. And there's CBC trying to get a little bit of sympathy for them. I think you'll see that continue. What does it do in terms of our day-to-day lives? Well, you've seen an announcement. Of course, the price of oil and gas goes up. One of the benchmarks that use called Brent, measuring a certain type of crude, Brent crude has gone up just over the weekend 11%, up to $80 a barrel. You can possibly see that continue to go up. One of the main reasons for that, the Strait of Hormuz, which is in the Middle East and is a major shipping point, 20% of all oil and gas goes through that narrow strait. And anytime that there is conflict, and of course, major shipping companies will not send their product through that strait while there's a war going on. So that will limit supply even more. And it's interesting, a lot of people are not aware that China has been heavily dependent on oil from Iran. So the two regimes in the world with possibly the worst human rights records and violations supporting each other. And it's estimated that China, once Iranian oil is, the flow of that stops, which it pretty well will now to China, that China only has a reserve of about 100 days of oil. And that's pretty significant. That means they're going to be under pressure. They're going to start to panic. Let's see where that particular situation leads. And the cost of everything will go up because a war like this is inflationary. The Federal Reserve in the United States, where everybody had been guessing that in their upcoming announcement that rates would go down, that would encourage people to buy and spend more. Rates would go down because inflation had been dropping, but international warfare, if we want to call it that, always causes for an increase in spending and therefore inflation going up. So my guess is, keep an eye on it. The Federal Reserve in the U.S. may in fact not lower their rate when they make their announcement coming up in June. So let's see where that goes. Remember, the single biggest cause of inflation in any country is governments spending borrowed money. Please don't forget that. Governments spending borrowed money is always, there are other factors, but always the single greatest cause. So at times like this, when governments, which love spending anyway, they will take a disaster like this, they will take a situation, a global situation, crisis like this, and they will use that as an excuse for spending. So watch for an inflationary rise, not a good thing. And keep in mind when people, because as we say, you're going to see more and more media start to question, why is the U.S. doing this? Why is Canada supporting the U.S.? Why are most of Europe is still supporting the U.S.? Keep in mind a real, if we say a bottom line here, the theocracy, the theologically driven Islamist extremists in Iran, the most extreme in the world, they actually believe in the prophecies from their own writing, from the Quran. They actually believe that there will be the rise of the 13th Imam, as they call it. The 13th Imam is the one who is going to deal the death blow to Israel. And the Ayatollah and others in that regime, they secretly hope that they could possibly maybe be that Imam that brings the destruction of the world. This is actually driving their geopolitical thinking. And when you get a death cult like that, and they have a nuclear capability, everybody is at risk. It's Israel first. That's just one of the Satans. There's another Satan out there that's constantly named by Iran. So keep that in mind. If they had been allowed to get nuclear capability, there is no question. They are not a rational state, and they would have used nuclear capability, no question about it. It had to be stopped. One of the other things that happens that gets obscured when there is global conflict like this, other issues more locally can kind of get obscured. Things can get a back seat, but they should not be ignored. Yes, we've got to be conscious what's going on around the world, but right in Canada, just recently, the government of Ontario under Premier Ford announced that there would be permission for private online gambling, not just through the resorts or casinos that are found on First Nations reserved, and not just through the lottos, but unleashed the ability for, and it's huge, online gambling. And so they've been tracking the mental health lines, the helplines, in conjunction with that over the same period. The calls to the mental health line in Ontario for anxiety among young men has gone up 300% since the announcement that you just saw relative to the gambling. So keep in mind there is also stuff that happens locally that goes on and needs to be attended to. One of the funny little quirks, I guess you could say, that takes place, you're going to hear some noise behind me. That is not machine gun fire. We're not in the middle of Iran here, but you're going to hear some noise. There's some construction, I guess, above my studio here. We talk about oil price going up. There was an interesting little scenario. There was a shot, you may have seen it. Susie Wiles, of course, who is an assistant head of chief of staff to President Trump, was in the war room with him, and she's talking to him. And right there in that picture, because media being media notice everything, they notice she's wearing a watch, one of those trainer type watch, and media went berserk saying this breaks safety protocols. Those watches can be tapped into by the enemy. It turns out the research has quickly been done. That's what's called a Whoop watch. Whoop is the name of the company that makes that watch, and it is not capable of giving out GPS or your location. And they were able actually to take a look at the watch, and they found out that Susie's heart has a low heart rate, and almost overnight, sales of that watch have gone through the roof. So it's not only price of oil, you never know what else is going to take off. It also, surprisingly, at this time, and again, not to be distracted from what's going on globally, former President Obama has just taken a bit of a sideways swipe at Gavin Newsom, who is positioning himself. He'd like to be president one day. He's running for the Democrat ticket. But former President Obama took a real swipe at policies in California, which are leading to the huge and have led to gigantic homeless crisis in Los Angeles. Very interesting to see a Democrat president taking a shot at Gavin Newsom on that. Well, the U.S. hockey team showed up on Saturday Night Live, and it was actually kind of funny. There were some shots back and forth with the women's team there, but also very interesting to note that while President Trump still gets criticized for an offside joke he made in the Oval Office that he would probably be impeached if he brought the women's team in. In fact, as you know, the women's hockey team, which also beat Canada, was invited to the Oval Office, but they said their travel schedule wouldn't allow for it. And they still, the mainstream media going after them, while the mainstream media continues to ignore Gavin Newsom, his own press secretary, his own office, literally telling a female reporter to F off, calling another supporter, Nicki Minaj, a very, the rapper, strong supporter of Trump, calling her a hoe, and zero criticism from mainstream media. So, but it turns out the joke is actually on SNL. They continue to go down in the ratings, and people are now making note of this. Very well-known actors and others. For instance, in the announcement of season 51, which took place in October, the numbers are now in. That was their ratings from the year before, down 24% in a year, down 24% in a year. And the comments being made, they've gone too political. A lot of their stuff isn't even funny. And at the same time, other satirical comedy networks like Babylon Bee have gone way up because they take shots at everybody and they try and focus on humor. Well, the Secretary of Defense in the U.S. has been focused not just on the Army, but also on scouting, on the Boy Scouts. You'll recall a few years ago, Boy Scouts changed their name, or it was changed to Scouting America, because they wanted to allow girls in, and DEI and woke policies and LGBTQ policies really taking hold there. And they've come to an agreement now. Pete Hegseth had threatened them, saying if they can, it's up to them if they want to continue their DEI policies, want to continue their open bathroom policies, etc. And if they wanted to drop merit-based promotion, that's up to them, but they wouldn't get any more federal funding. And the Scouting America has swung around, and they have made a clear commitment. They're going to ditch DEI. They're going to become far less woke. They're going to make bathrooms boys for boys and girls for girls, and they're looking more at promotion based on merit. So interesting what a few dollars can do there. In the sporting world, Michael Jordan, some people say, how can a guy move from being the top in his own world of sporting and moving into U.S. NASCAR racing and racing in general, which is becoming, and it has been for years, hugely popular in the U.S. Well, his main driver, Tyler Reddick, has set a record. Nobody's ever done it before, winning the top 3 outings of the season. He's won at Austin, Daytona, and Atlanta. So a lot more shift, a lot more women being involved in watching and getting excited about racing. You're familiar, here's a real shift on the cultural front. You've probably heard of the organization broadly called Nickelodeon. It's basically the child's networks that developed way back as far as the late 70s, and the decline that they've gone through and are still going through. Back in the 70s, some of you remember, if your kids and grandkids were around then, the green slime, it was kind of a fun thing that was introduced. And then in the 80s, there were shows like Rugrats and others. And then in the 2000s, of course, most famously, SpongeBob SquarePants coming on the scene, all under the Nickelodeon banner. And then it became increasingly woke through 2015. And then in 2020, of course, the organization announcing that SpongeBob SquarePants was embracing LGBTQ and Pride Day. And so they've measured now from 2016 to 2023 the viewership with kids and their families on the Nickelodeon various networks has dropped 86%. That's huge, 86%. And so what happens, people start to notice that. David Zucker, if you remember him in terms of comedy, the famous movie that was very funny, Airplane, and the other movie, Naked Gun, has said that even Nickelodeon has become too political. And somebody also famously with Nickelodeon, Butch Hartman, and you can hear the the construction going on. I'm not stopping. I'm plowing right through here, folks. We're just about at the end here. Butch Hartman was with the Nickelodeon under their banner. He had shows, you might have seen them, sort of family shows. One was Fairly Odd Parents, it was called. He has now said he's going into his own animation studios, and he is making animation for kids and families, and that are, and this is his words, glorifying to God and much more family friendly. So as the noise above me increases and the noise around the world increases, folks, stay tuned. We'll be in a quiet studio tomorrow. The noise will be gone, but the news will be there. Thanks for staying with us. Have a great day.